We got Derek with us today, founder of Moonbeam.
Moonbeam, it's an EVM-compatible smart contract blockchain, purpose-built or specially built to support cross-chain use cases. Why Moonbeam has been successful is that idea was sound. Moonbeam probably is like the chain that has the most channels open between it and other chains.
It's sort of like a win-win-win because for the user it's easier to do it, but then also for Moonbeam it's great. All right, thank you for tuning into the Teachmedefi podcast. I'm very excited for this episode today because we got the founder of a project on that we have been following for a long time here at Teachmedefi. We got Derek with us today, founder of Moonbeam. Hi, Derek. How are you today?
Oh, really, really good. Thanks for having me on the show here.
Yeah, our pleasure. I'm really excited for this. By the way, I was at Decoded as well in Copenhagen, and we did talk to some projects there. And I did see you, but I didn't get a chance to come to you, unfortunately.
Yeah, that was a nice event. So I'm not sure what's going to happen this year with Decoded, but it was a good audience, good crowd. Got to be on the big stage, so that's rare. I guess I'm not usually on the big stage.
Yeah, and a great talk, by the way. We did watch that one. So I'm excited to dive into this here on our podcast now. But I mean, before we go into depth, can you just kick us off with what Moonbeam is for viewers that might not be familiar with it yet?
Sure. Yeah. So Moonbeam, it's an EVM compatible smart contract blockchain. It's been kind of purpose built or specially built to support cross-chain use cases. And it was one of the first so-called parachains to launch on the Polkadot network. So we were one of the teams early on that was building the Substrate, and I think it was the second parachain to launch when Polkadot went live. So yeah, I guess at least in the Polkadot context, I guess we're kind of one of the OG crew of people that have been around for a while.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the chain launched in January 22, if I'm not mistaken. What has the journey been like since then? Any milestones that were achieved? Any specific learnings along the way that stuck out to you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, it's been non-linear, I guess I'd say, but that's maybe also this space in general, right? Tends to have twists and turns in it. So what would I say? I mean, the broad strokes I'd say is, when we first came up with the idea for Moonbeam, I think there was this appreciation that, hey, here's this new ecosystem. It's, going to have many chains in it. They're going to be interoperating with each other. What is it that's something useful that we could build and provide back to this larger Polkadot ecosystem? And I think that when we went around talking to devs, it became clear that, and I think it's even actually just become more so, but even then, there was a strong preference for the EVM technology stack. Even back then, this was in 2019 and 20, we started talking to people. And so that became this obvious thing of hey, there's this great new network, new technology, new thing coming together. But, this kind of the de facto standard is EVM. So there's going to be, it's something useful to do to build, something EVM compatible that is still kind of part of this larger system, interoperable with these other chains. And so that was, the original focus was let's work on an Ethereum implementation in Substrate. And there was a bunch of things that came together there that were helpful. So there was, a guy at Parity that had been working on some of the pieces of this. It wasn't a complete system, but he had some pieces. There was a Rust EVM implementation that he had done, a guy named Wei Tang, a very smart guy, by the way, a very great engineer. And so I think we realized, okay, there's enough pieces here, but there's a bunch of missing pieces. Let's pull them all together and try to make a full working Ethereum implementation. The goal was, let's just be able to have people use MetaMask, use all the tools they're familiar with, but connect to the chain we're creating, Moonbeam, but have it be a Substrate chain underneath. So that means it has all sorts of advanced features, functions, and can then interoperate with the rest of this Polkadot ecosystem. So, I mean, that idea has evolved a bunch since then, but that was the original idea. And I think, a large part of why Moonbeam has, been successful is that idea was sound, right? So I think that's correct. If anything, EVM has gotten more dominant, since this 2020 timeframe, because now almost all the rollups, with the exception being Starkware, are EVM based. So I would say that EVM is quite dominant, when it comes to developer tooling, infrastructure, integrations, traction, end users, having MetaMask as a wallet. So I see that as kind of this role that Moonbeam can play, as being this, this compatibility gateway, right, for people to come in and out, for things to integrate. Your question was on milestones. So I think just shipping that, like, as a first thing, was obviously a big milestone, launching as a parachain. A lot of pieces have to come together for that. But then it's really, it's just continuing to like evolve the feature set. And I think the thing that we've spent a lot of time on since originally shipping that EVM compatibility is around like cross-chain use cases. That's, to me, the value prop of Polkadot is, you can build, you can use a super powerful framework Substrate. You can build specialized chains that are good at some particular thing, but you can interoperate with other chains to get the things that you're not good at. So if Moonbeam's good at EVM compatibility, there might be someone else who has a DeFi chain or has some other kind of chain. So then there's certain things that EVM chains are good at, so they can kind of work with Moonbeam, and then we can get specialized services back from these other chains. That's the kind of whole is greater than the sum of its parts idea that I think is the core value prop of Polkadot.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you're right. So many EVM chains have popped up. I mean, what's sort of like, how do you think about that? What's the differentiator here for Moonbeam from all these other ones?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think that this, in some ways, it took a lot of work and it's underappreciated in the market, because if you're going for an EVM compatible chain in the market, by far and away the easiest thing to do is you fork Geth. Geth is the main Ethereum client, that runs, that's the main client. And, most EVM compatible chains in one way, shape, or form have just forked that. And so that's, including Avalanche C chain is used large parts of that code base. BNB is based on that. So that's what people have done. And that, not to say that forking is easy. You still have to, there's a lot of things to worry about, but you're kind of getting this whole Ethereum base implementation as part of the fork, and then you're adapting it to your use case. Maybe you're increasing the block time, you're changing consensus, how consensus works. In our case, this was a full, a complete, from scratch, implementation. And I think while that's, was more difficult to do, it does allow for much more flexibility. So one of the examples, we have it's a Substrate chain also, right? So it has things like OpenGov on it. It has all of these kind of advanced Substrate functionalities. It has a whole staking system on there. And then, so one of the areas where we've done a lot of work is then exposing that advanced functionality into the EVM. That's much harder to do when you have just a forked, something like Geth. So, this is where on Moonbeam, if you go to the developer docs, there's whole libraries of precompiles. We have all these precompiles that you can use that we've used to extend the base EVM functionality to include many advanced features. So there's, like I said, governance, staking, cross-chain interactions. There's many different, kinds of advanced features that we've added over time.
Yeah. And you mentioned the interoperability that is sort of made possible on Polkadot, and Moonbeam can be this gateway for developers to kind of access and leverage that. How has this been going? I know, I think there needed to be, in general, retail probably needed to do some sort of expectation management. I believe when parachains went live, it was sort of thought by many that, okay, now we'll have to, we can immediately leverage this cross-chain ecosystem, right? But you hadn't even XCM for a long time then launched. So where are we at now, and what do you see coming up next? And are you seeing projects leveraging this sort of interoperability cross-chain thing? What's Moonbeam doing? Yeah. This is
the thing, again, that I really think is the core value prop. So this is of the whole ecosystem, and that's something that we're investing into and leaning into. I definitely correct that things launched, but XCM trailed, and even some of the first versions, now it's the versions have increased with substantive changes in between the versions as things have matured. And so it's taken some time for it to become more mature and more dev friendly, let's say. And we've even done some work to make it dev friendlier on Moonbeam, providing these EVM precompiles that allow you to access XCM functionality. So one of the first features we rolled out was what we call XC20s. So that's basically token transfers that would result in an ERC20 compatible asset on Moonbeam. Kind of obvious first cross-chain use case. It's not it's not like some like great brand new like idea, but it definitely is one of the most heavily like used features, because just for obvious reasons, right? So being able to create these XCM channels with other chains, enable bidirectional like token exchange, that's been like heavily used. So I don't even know, I haven't looked, but there's many channels now on Moonbeam. Moonbeam probably is like the chain that has the most like channels open between it and like other chains, either Moonriver on Kusama or Moonbeam on Polkadot. And I'll probably say that still to this day, like token transfers are the main like volume out there, right? In terms of XCM messages, it's mostly, so most recently I think it's Manta, getting between like Manta Atlantic and Pacific, is like routed like via Moonbeam. So that's like, I was looking the other day, that was like a large driver of like XCM like messages, is people on the Manta parachain kind of like transiting across Moonbeam. So token transfers is one, but we do have generic like XCM functionality. One of the features that we rolled out last year, that I think is very nicely illustrative of the possibilities, is this thing we call Moonbeam routed liquidity. So what Moonbeam routed liquidity is Moonbeam has, again, given its EVM compatibility, it's much easier for other like infrastructure providers and protocols to integrate to it, because they already have EVM integrations onto Mainnet, onto like L2s. And so I think, just to, for listeners, right, it's like, I think if you go to a project like that and you're like, oh, well, there's Polkadot, there's this great ecosystem, integrate. Oh, but we have like this like other tech stack that's not EVM based. We have Substrate. It has a different set of RPCs. It has a different everything. The problem for them is, okay, well now like we had this EVM thing, but now we'd have to go do engineering work to create like an integration with Substrate. That's kind of a tall order, right? So then then you get into the realm of, okay, like what's the business case? How, well, if I invest 4 months doing that, will I get a return on it? So it's a different discussion than with Moonbeam, where it's like, no, just take the thing you have. You just have to like, yes, there's some cost maybe to running some infrastructure around it, but like there's no development work. You basically should just point it to Moonbeam and it'll work. That's a much easier sell. And so, like one of the early kind of infrastructure providers that came to Moonbeam were bridges. And so, at this point, all the major bridges like are on Moonbeams. That's folks like Axelar, Wormhole, Layer Zero. And so this MRL feature is quite interesting, where the idea is, let's use XCM to allow other chains in Polkadot to leverage the bridging connections that are on Moonbeam. Because it's pretty hard to get like Wormhole to deploy your chain. That's like not that easy, right? I mean, I think that first they have to agree, and even if they agreed, it would be like very expensive. And so the idea is like, and we have several parachains using, like HydraDX, for example, is using this now, where the idea is like a user can start on Ethereum mainnet and can say, hey, like I want to use Wormhole to bridge to Hydra, and here's the destination address on Hydra. And so like the user has this one-click experience where they're kind of moving from Ethereum mainnet, let's say like USDC or ETH, and it's like arriving like at the HydraDX chain. But under the hood, like Moonbeam is facilitating it. So like under the hood, it uses the Wormhole connection from mainnet to Moonbeam. And then like there's kind of a behind the scenes like a relay where it then gets moved onto XCM to go to its final destination, like on Hydra. But the user doesn't know that. They just get a one-click experience of basically working its way through. So that's kind of a hint at like the future, like what it looks like for me. So they're like, the user is using some app, they click to where they want to go. Under the scene, or under the hood, like they're kind of using all these protocols, right? They're using Wormhole, they're using Moonbeam, they're using XCM, they're using all these pieces, but they don't necessarily, they don't know about all those steps, right? They're kind of hidden away or happening for the user. But for Hydra, now they get this like way to like access users on mainnet in this like streamlined way. So that's that's an example of a feature that I think ties together a lot of pieces. And there's another project we're helping called Tansy, where they're planning on using this, right? So that you can launch your own chain, but like, hey, almost like out of the box, like you can have like, all bridge support, like kind of built in out of the box using this MRL technique. That's interesting, right? Like that's like, that's something that like could get you up and running, like into market, like a lot faster than would be the case otherwise if you're just trying to launch a chain on your own.
Yeah, that's super interesting, especially because this is like one of those instances where you can see this sort of abstracting away the complexities from the user. And I know you've been talking about that as well. And it's sort of like a win-win-win, because like for the user, it's easier to do it, to get to Hydra, for example, or to whatever chain in the Polkadot ecosystem that they want to, one-click experience. But then also for Moonbeam, it's great because the network is being used. There's activity on it. It supports the network. And yeah, I mean, other chains are happy to use this through you because they get access to liquidity easier.
That's right. And I would almost double click on your thing about abstraction, because for me, and I know we talked earlier about the some of the talks I've given in the past. I do feel, coming especially from this Web 2 background, that the UX is like one of the key inhibitors of like end user growth for a lot of these protocols. They're just like way too hard to use. They require too much knowledge about wallets and infrastructure and other things for like regular people to use. Yeah. And so that is something that creating these abstractions, I think is key basically to creating those better user experiences. We'll be able to onboard many users. Now, this multi-chain thing, right? I mean, I draw these analogies from like the Web 2 world where any single blockchain, like it's like saying it's like one server. There's only like so many users you can handle on one server. You need like, when you're using a regular Web 2 app, like, on your mobile phone, you're using like hundreds and hundreds of servers, like in the cloud and like, wherever they're being hosted. And so that's the direction I see Web 3 moving in, is abstract experience, but under the hood, there may be many, many blockchains that are like servicing, those user experiences, but the users won't know. Like they certainly don't, it's not going to work well if they have to like click approve and are kind of like clicking on transactions for each of the 50 blockchains that's supporting their transaction. Like that has to be kind of abstracted away. And so that's the direction, that's kind of one of the guiding principles, we have on our work is, kind of assuming there's going to be these many chains, how do we create these like better user experiences and facilitate the connectivity and kind of this abstraction layer to help like make, user experiences that aren't too complicated.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so in that vein, what do you think perhaps Polkadot in general can do better to onboard more users and developers? So user experience, developer experience, this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I feel like I'm probably a bit of a contrarian and a bit of a squeaky wheel, like sometimes, like, in the sense that, and don't get me wrong, Substrate is an incredibly powerful technology, but I think it's just inherently difficult to acquire users if you're asking them to switch technology stacks, right? So this was the Moonbeam idea, is saying, look, like the users are already on EVM, they already have MetaMask, they already have these things, and so let's try to like meet them where they are, and make it like easy for them to onboard, right? Like, and I think that's kind of played out in a way. It's much more difficult to say, okay, step one is you need to download, at the time it was Polkadot.js, there's better options now, there's Talisman, there's better options, but you're still like download some alternate like wallet, like, set up a seed phrase. And maybe they did this once for MetaMask, but like for some people, that's like a tall order, right? Like there's, not everyone's a power user. And so I think it's just, that is just inherently difficult. So, I mean, this was kind of our strategy. And I think if I had a wish, it would be for Polkadot to lean more into like the Moonbeam style approach and say, let's like meet people where they are. Because I do think sometimes it's kind of like, well, with Substrate, we solved all these problems with EVM. It's the next generation. It's better. I think that's true, but like there's still this practical reality of like where everyone is. So you can still kind of, have this like, compatibility approach, right? And get users in, kind of red pill them so that then, now I'm on Moonbeam. Oh, look, there's all these other like interesting chains. Let me move out to these other chains. Oh, I need a wallet, but like they're already in. And like, so that's kind of at least how like we've been thinking about things. So I think, there's inherent challenges in just having this alternate tech stack, but obviously it opens new possibilities. I think with my take on Polkadot is like the tech is like the best out there. It's like very, very good technology, but it is this thing where I think the ecosystem can be a little bit like isolated feeling, right? So it's kind of not part of some of these like mainstream narratives right now, which are a lot of them are centered around Ethereum mainnet, right, and the L2 ecosystems that are on there. And so I think that like it's just kind of like figuring out more ways to connect and be relevant. And honestly, I don't think you look at some of these L2 ecosystems, they're not like, Polkadot, like in Substrate, are way in advance feature-wise from a decentralization perspective, from on-chain governance, all these areas. But it's really awareness and getting to the users is the key thing. I guess you're part of that, right? It's creating more awareness and content. I see that as like more of the challenge right now, and then making it easier for people to onboard, for both devs and users to like onboard into the ecosystem. I know there's work now around Asset Hub and other things, which is kind of fine. But I personally, I think that like onboarding through an EVM environment is better, basically, and like probably is more what people want.
Okay, so that would be a
part, right? So
yeah. So that would be a concrete thing in that vein that you mentioned, like onboarding through the EVM, for example, would make it more approachable. Substrate.
It's just familiar for people. So I think, and again, like I know the team is working on Asset Hub. I think it's going to be, it's a great like service to the ecosystem. But, again, you're like on some different, like you have to install some different wallets. Even if you have like direct like exchange withdrawals to Asset Hub, you're still in the realm of asking users to like install like a different wallet, set up a new seed phrase, figure out from there how to like get to other places. These are not, I don't think these are that easy things, basically. These are not like that easy.
Yeah. I guess an example that sort of ties into that for me was today, there was the announcement that USDC withdrawals from Binance launched to Polkadot Asset Hub.
I didn't see that. It's great.
Did you hear it?
I didn't see that, so that I'm learning. I learned about that for the first time here.
There you go. And apparently it's the lowest fee for withdrawal, for example. And in any case, I just wanted to go see, have a look at how much USDC has been minted, so to say, for example, on Asset Hub. And the way I would do that in on Etherscan, Ethereum Block Explorer, I could go look up the token contract address or whatever and have a look there. But then I didn't really know what to do here on Asset Hub. I couldn't really find anything either. I tried. I guess that's a bit of a niche case, but an example on like analytics at least.
But I think it goes back to like some of the points I was making that I agree with you that, and I mean, we've known the team at Etherscan for some time. That like I'll tell you, when we first started talking to devs, that was like the immediate feedback that we got from devs like building this stuff on Moonbeam. Right? We're like, well, what do you need? Like, we want to like make a great dev experience. There was a few things that they said, like we need Chainlink, we need Etherscan, we need, like they listed off the things. They're like, we need these things like to be effective and like be comfortable. So, these were some of the first things we did is, okay, well, like we figure out how to get the Etherscan like on Moonbeam. And I think it just goes back to this. This is like what people are familiar with. They know how to use it already. They know they might have iterations with it already. And so even you're saying like you would know exactly what to do, like, on Moonscan or on Etherscan to look at this. And then, but then otherwise you have to kind of figure out what's going on here. But, what is it's going on. So I think it's the same thing we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I found the asset ID, but then I didn't know what to do with it. So maybe I'll find out.
Now the plan that I've heard, like I think, I think there is obviously recognition of some of these problems. So I know that the plan that I heard when I last spoke with the team, the Asset Hub team, was that they want to create something where it's kind of like MRL, like I was describing, right? So like from Binance, you would be able to say like withdraw to Moonbeam, and then maybe it goes like via like Asset Hub, but it ends up on Moonbeam. So I think that's what they're striving for. I just don't think that's like possible. That's not possible
right now. You mean?
Yeah, it's not possible right now.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be something cool. Yeah. You mentioned the narratives as well, and I noticed that as well. I found it interesting that you spoke to this. For example, some of them are, like restaking with EigenLayer. I feel like that's something. Isn't that something that Polkadot, for example, has solved? So Polkadot has shared crypto economic security, but yet there's no talk about it in those circles and with those narratives. And the other thing, this data availability thing with Celestia, I've been hearing, Polkadot has it, could leverage this. But yeah, they're kind of missing in the conversation, I guess.
100%. I would say that, EigenLayer is like, kind of like trying to do something Polkadot-like, but like 5-6 years behind. But it's on Ethereum mainnet, and that's like where kind of the interest in like narrative is these days to some extent. But yes, I would agree with that. We've been also doing kind of engineering work, like in learning ZK technologies, working with some of the ZKL2s from Moonsong Labs, which we can get to. That's like the company I'm with these days. And I can tell you right now that those are not decentralized systems, right? So like you still have like the team running the sequencer, like largely for those on these L2s. And there's plans to decentralize, but like, there's kind of it's a roadmap kind of situation. Yeah. And, so I look at this and I compare, it's like on Moonbeam, we have, I think, 80 collators. There's like 80 effectively sequencers that are like in like a decentralized network with a consensus system, under a shared security umbrella that are like producing blocks. Any one of them, if it's permissionless, any one of them can go offline. Then there's 79 others that like pick up. I mean, it's a much more resilient system and like it's kind of like what the end state of these L2s like are envisioning is, hey, we want something like that, but it exists already today, like over here. So in some sense, it's a little frustrating, I guess, sometimes, like where it's like, okay, these problems are solved, but you realize that in this world it's not like all tech, right? It's like there's other factors at work, and I think for better or for worse, it's like Ethereum mainnet like continues to be kind of the center of the universe when it comes to just like liquidity assets, like users, like so. I just think being close to Ethereum is something that a lot of devs want, at this point.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what are your thoughts on the sustainability of the crypto market? You kind of have, the boom and bust hype cycles, those new layer 1 blockchains launching, getting a lot of attention. Airdrop farming seems to be one of the major things that users do on chain these days and talk about. You got like venture capital VCs and other market participants hyping new project launches over more tested chains. Just, are we still in a highly speculative phase of crypto? Are we still ways out from solving real world problems in Web3, from providing useful applications to the masses? And just what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I mean, a few thoughts on that. I mean, in my mind, is it speculative or is there real progress happening? It's not a binary question. It's both. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of the unique aspect of the space where there's these boom and bust cycles and, there's all this like, speculative like activity, while at the same time, there's useful things that are being progressed and useful technology, like some of the things we talked about, like providing like actually decentralized systems and other things. And I think that, that actually leads to, I think, good progress in the sense that it's noisy, but it's good progress in the sense that like good quality projects like will get funding. I think that this is a space where I've seen, if you have like a highly competent team, a good idea, you're going to get funding. There's like enough funding around. L1s, right? So I think that, L1s command a premium basically in like valuation. And so there's always this like desire to like fund new L1s. I do think, though, that like kind of what we were saying before, that to fund like a new tech stack that's going to compete with EVM, for example, very, very difficult at this point, right? So I think that you need like massive amounts of money to do that. And you can see people, even some people that had massive amounts are kind of struggling, right? And like, so there's, when I look out at the landscape, non-EVM, you have Substrate, you have Cosmos SDK, you've got, I think, Solana, like looks like it's gotten critical mass.
What about those move
platforms? I think they're kind of there, but it's not like a big space where there's like dozens and dozens of these things. And I think it's very, very hard. And the other thing I think is very hard is like, to have like just a standalone blockchain. So if I'm like, I'm going to have a blockchain, it maybe is faster, better, whatever, but it's kind of an island and it's not part of some like larger ecosystem. It's not part of Ethereum mainnet and its ecosystem. It's not part of Cosmos or Polkadot. It's not part of one of these. Yeah. It's very hard, like, because you're just like have to bootstrap everything on your own. You got to like build connections out to everything. It's like, I think that's like incredibly hard unless you have some, very compelling use case that's like non-crypto native where you're going to get users in demand just coming into your chain for other reasons. And so, that's kind of my take is, I mean, it's obviously interesting experiments. There's these parallel EVMs now. There's some different experiments going on that are quite interesting. But, I see it as like, there's kind of consolidation happening on the tech stack side to like EVM and some small handful of others. And then there's consolidation into like certain like multi-chain ecosystems. So that's like Polkadot, Cosmos, and then these like L2s. That's frankly where I see most, that's where I think that like things are going to get, where the traction is going to go basically. Maybe throw Avalanche and there are the subnets in there. I mean, they have, that's a good quality project too, but these are the ones that I would keep my eye on.
Okay. What's your take on the whole ETF thing? Do you think the Bitcoin ETFs are significant for the industry? Is it more noise? What do you think?
No. It may have been over. I think people got maybe a little overexcited about it, but it's obviously like a big step forward, basically, in just allowing capital to flow in. And there's just like a lot of people that aren't in a place where they can open Coinbase accounts and have some separate part of their portfolio there, right? They're working with an investment manager. So I see it as like extremely net positive. It's just, I think people might have been expecting, there'll be this flood of like liquidity coming in like in the first like week. Well, these things take time, right? It's like, I think for a lot of these people, it's like in the realm of like investment managers that meet with their clients like once a quarter, and then there's like a phone call, and then they're like, it's a little bit slow to move some of this stuff, but it's gonna, I'm quite bullish on this in the sense that, over the next like several years, that's going to lead to like a lot more inflows like into Bitcoin. And then of course, projects like Moonbeam, Polkadot, like other things, like, they are net beneficiaries ultimately kind of down the line of liquidity coming into Bitcoin, which then kind of cascades its way downwards, like into other ecosystems over time.
Right. You mentioned, that it's not binary with speculation, but also like meaningful technological progress in the industry. What do you love most and hate most about crypto at the moment in general?
That's a good question. Easily what I hate most, not to get too philosophical, but this, like working in Web3 is really an amazing opportunity from my point of view. I was around in the first like internet wave. I was a young guy though, and I didn't have the knowledge, access to resources or anything else to really make a go of it in that first like internet boom, like in the late 90s. So I see that like this came around, it has so many of the same kind of potential and possibilities and kind of being there at the moment when something's being created. And so this was my opportunity then to say like, hey, well now I'm like more experienced and like have access to resources, have knowledge of how to build companies. And so I really jumped on it and haven't looked back. I really that's an amazing opportunity. And I think for people working in the space, I'm quite confident that people will look back at this time and say that, there was like these key like innovations that happened that like are going to shape the way that the world works, the way that people interact with each other, the way that they, the way employment works, like and what occupies their time. How people are coordinated together, like this is like happening now. So that's incredibly exciting and kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity in a way. Like, so that's the amazing part, on the downside, it's just like, the thing I hate is just like all the bad actors and other things that get brought up by the speculation, which just besmirches like the whole industry. So, like you're at like some dinner party, like with like regular people, and it's like, well, do I even bring up like work in the space or not? It's like, might be a mixed response.
Do I bring up my job?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the thing that is just so frustrating and annoying. But I'm obviously, I think that will kind of like wash away over time as like, that I think that the speculative part like kind of rises and like, ebbs and flows, but that underlying productive part like continually builds, right? So you kind of have this like building thing over time that gets like more and more useful and more utility built, even if there's like this like tide of like, of kind of like badness that kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah. You'll end up sitting by yourself at the dinner table,
Something like that. Speaking of, find other Web3 people, and then kind of
you gotta go looking for all the empty tables. Maybe they're there.
That's right.
Sweet. I mean, speaking of Web2 and your background, I've watched a few interviews with you, and I think I never heard anyone ask you about this. In the past, you founded a company, I believe, called Fuse. That had a $250 million exit, I think, according to Crunchbase, and was active in enterprise software, I believe. Your co-founder was Steve Kokkinos. I hope I said the name right.
That's right.
Right. Who interestingly went on to become the CEO of another large blockchain project called Algorand. And he's now set to become CEO of the company that will take over Celsius operations after their bankruptcy, I think. I saw an article on that. I'm just wondering, like, what's the relationship like to Steve, to Algorand? And are there any synergies or projects that could make sense there between Moonbeam and Algorand?
Yeah. So I think the story of how I got into crypto is exactly like through this guy Steve, who was my co-founder, who started this company Fuse together. So he left. I was probably back in 2017, 2018, like as that Algorand project was starting. That's based in Boston here, like I am.
Okay.
And he teamed up with some very smart, like MIT cryptographers. There's a guy, Silvio Macaulay, who's the founder of the project, who invented like zero knowledge proofs, or basically an
he's won an award,
person.
A big math award. Was it Turing Award?
He won the Turing Award, so he's the real deal. And so, but it's really when he left to start this. I'm not an OG, right? So it was in this almost like 2018 timeframe. Is like when I was learning about where he went, and he was kind of saying, "Oh, there's so much opportunity here. This is great. You need to learn about it." That's what got me into things, and so that's what then started me down the path of starting a company. Originally, the company I started was PureStake that worked on the project Moonbeam. Right. We did do work in the Algorand ecosystem as well. It's a bit less so these days, but when we first started, again, given that connection, I think we were running infrastructure for Algorand, still do to some extent, like from one of the partner companies. Like it's not like the company Moonsong Labs I'm with, but one of the other companies that are kind of in the constellation companies that work on Moonbeam. Yeah. So infrastructure, RPC, endpoints, like this kind of thing. There was a project we worked on for an Explorer and a wallet, like early on Algorand. So this is really where we cut our teeth on just learning about blockchain and helping support that network as they launched, given this connection there. When we did go to kind of do something more ambitious in this Moonbeam project, we did obviously elect to do that like in the Polkadot ecosystem. And I think the key thing for me there was just this belief that there's going to be many chains, and that like a belief in these like multi-chain interoperable ecosystems, whereas Algorand did have some plans for that, but they're more of a single chain, purpose-built, fast for like transactions. It's more that idea. Whereas we really wanted to build a chain, and so at the time then that was kind of Cosmos or Polkadot, right? You kind of had to make your choice there. There's many more options now, but back then there was kind of two options, and so that's what led us down the Moonbeam path. Is that vision of wanting to be this kind of interconnection point and providing kind of services, cross-chain services to different kinds of chains.
Right. And is there any connection there still that could be interesting for the future, or?
I still keep, a very close and dear friend of mine. Steve remains that, because we worked together for a long, long time together on different startups in Web2. And so, he's someone that I'm quite close with. He has since left Algorand, so he's no longer the CEO of Algorand. But we continue to, be, friendly with the folks in the Algorand ecosystem. We obviously have this history from having been around from their launch. And I think there could be, the challenge they have is some of the things we were talking about before, where it's, excellent technology. It's I think it strikes a very nice balance between decentralization and performance. So they're able to achieve very high throughput while still keeping decentralization properties. The thing they give up is programming flexibility. So it's a little bit more of a constrained programming environment. But I think, the challenge is what we were talking about before, is that when you have a non-EVM tech stack, it's, I think it's just challenging to get dev adoption, right? So that's not their challenge alone. That's anyone that is non-EVM based, from my perspective, I think has this challenge.
Yeah, I think there's many, like you said, many chains that struggle, the new ones to struggle with liquidity and users and all that. It's hard. I imagine it's hard to bootstrap an ecosystem from scratch. But you would know more about that than me. But speaking of scalability and stuff, a lot of people are currently talking about Polkadot 2.0. These upgrades which are expected to come to the network. I'm just wondering what those would mean to Moonbeam. Those things like asynchronous backing, core time sales, elastic scaling, BEEFY, all these buzzwords, so to say.
Words, yeah. Obviously, some of these have been cooking in the oven for a long time. So asynchronous backing has been worked on for quite some time. Super excited to see it finally shipping. We're working on incorporating that, getting that to Moonbeam. shortly here. I think it may already be on our test nets, or will be shortly. It's a large throughput improvement. So
Okay.
We're expecting multiple X performance throughput improvements, which is needed. So I think that if I look at that trade-off space for Polkadot in general, if you're operating as a parachain right now, I would say, or maybe even in general for Polkadot, it optimizes more towards decentralization, right? So in general, it's optimizing, saying hey, we have a line in the sand of decentralization and being a something that we're not willing to give on, and as a result, there's less throughput. And there's other projects I'd say the antithesis is Solana. Solana's guiding principle is let's have good what we deem to be good enough decentralization, but then let's put all our energy into pushing throughput. Let's get throughput as fast as possible. That's a
and the
different
market
approach.
The market doesn't seem to care that much, at least when you look at token price and attention and activity there. It's
Yeah, it's true, right? So on this caring about decentralization, right? So I think, and this is the argument is that's the wrong thing to prioritize for, because the market and the devs don't care. I hear that argument, and I think there is some obviously evidence that that's true, but I struggle with that in at least two important ways. One is, why are we here, right? It's well, why are we here? And if you erode it too far, it's kind of the whole point of the exercise becomes pointless, because then it's well, let's just run it in the cloud, right? It's going to be way cheaper than creating a blockchain. Blockchains are very expensive and slow relative to just running a centralized infrastructure. So that's one. But two is that all it takes is one problem. When you have these less decentralized setups, it's not just philosophical, it's actually security properties that matter. And so I think people forget about this, and they're reminded when there's a problem. And so I kind of feel these narratives can shift quite quickly. If, for example, there were to be an L2 where the centralized sequencer being run by the team is hacked or is offline for some extended period of time, I think people would be whoa, what is going on here? And then that's all it takes is and obviously I don't wish that on anyone. But if that were to happen, I think that would be a big reminder for people being well, wait a minute, we can't have this these points of centralization that are single points of failure. We need something more robust, something more redundant.
Yeah.
And then people say, oh, okay, well, we forgot there's these other chains out there
Sorry,
that have
our bad.
this different trade-off. So unfortunately, I think it's kind of like that, where it's kind of fine until it's not fine.
Yeah.
And on some of these, though, I think it's a matter of time. Anything that's just a single point will fail at some point, basically. And so I that's kind of what I see is people need reminders from time to time as to why something like decentralization is important. Right. Or it could be censorship, right? It could be a censorship action where the team is or the centralized point is compelled to either censor someone or to do something. That's another example of that. That's kind of why decentralization is important, to maintain this censorship resistance property.
Right. And you were speaking about how with these upgrades, it kind of shifts, or it makes the argumentation easier in terms of Polkadot is decentralized, but now we can also achieve higher throughput and things like that.
Yeah, I think the throughput is again multiple times more block space to use. So I think that's going to be hugely beneficial. Especially if we're going into a more of a bull market, then I expect transaction volumes to rise. And now on Moonbeam, for example, there's just a fee market there, right? Just like Ethereum, it's a full Ethereum implementation, but that means that under heavier load, then transaction fees will start to go up, and that's leads to a poor, that's off-putting then to users. So then you have this kind of negative effect that happens as load increases. If there's more block space available, then you can just handle more transactions, more users, more load. So that's beneficial. You mentioned one other thing, so that's the thing that's here now. That's being rolled out now. That will also decrease the block time. So that's a bit of a coordination kind of. We need to give the ecosystem plenty of time to adapt to that. It's a 12-second to 6-second block time change. But this, the core time. These changes that are coming this year, I'm also pretty excited about. So for Moonbeam. So I think that one of the key beneficiaries of that will be small projects. So, for example, there's this several of the Moonbeam team left to start this project Tansy, and I think that core time is really great for that project in the sense that right now to get a parachain is a bunch of work and a bunch of overhead and a bunch of capital and other things. But there could be experiments that kind of more maybe pre-product market fit things where you want to try it. And so this new core time concept is much better suited to that, to say, hey, instead of getting $500,000, I don't know what it is now, $750,000 worth of DOT to win an auction and do all these things, to try out my idea in production, instead maybe it's $50,000 and it's just there's just enough block space that's purchased to help vet out an idea. Well, that's lower the barrier a lot basically to deploying a chain. So I think that's quite benefit. For Moonbeam, that's not the case. I feel obviously the value proposition is there, and there's already all this activity in the ecosystem. So it's more the opportunity I see for Moonbeam is this idea of having multiple cores. So right now block space validation is divided into what they call cores from the relay chain, and each parachain is assigned one core, which is roughly I think it's 5 or 6 validators from the relay chain validator set that are assigned down to your parachain every couple minutes, right? It gets shuffled around and you get a new set of 5 or 6 that are assigned down. Yeah. And so the last time I talked to Rob about this, he was explaining that the idea is, on the one hand, you could have part of a core, purchased via core time, or you could have multiple. So let's say that Moonbeam is well, we have so much volume, so instead of one core, maybe we do 2 cores onto Moonbeam. Now we have twice the the amount of block space that can get validated, and maybe then we could lower the block time to have it again, basically from 6 to 3 seconds, let's say. That could be interesting if there's enough activity to justify that additional expense. And so I see it as quite flexible then in both directions, both on the kind of the tail end as well as scale, kind of vertically scale up. Yeah, it can be helpful for Moonbeam.
Yeah, I think the word agile really fits there, which is used agile core time, I think, I've heard. Also something that I was thinking about, which I mentioned to Bill Laboon when we had him on the podcast, was I believe this core time sales model is also a bit more favorable to institutions and companies that would want to spin up a parachain, maybe, because you don't really have exposure to the asset dots. If you had the parachains, you would have to lock it up for 2 years. So you kind of have exposure to the price volatility of this asset, which is quite volatile in crypto. But now you can just buy DOT whenever you need it and buy the core time, and then you're basically done with it.
That's right. It's a lot easier. I mean, having gone through a crowd loan and this whole process, it's it's pretty complicated. It required custom development and other things to do that. So yeah, I just see a lot of innovation happening on this end. Tansy, there's other core time marketplaces that are coming. There's this project Elastic. So there's a bunch of people working on making this launch more accessible in the Polkadot context.
What about trustless bridging and BEEFY launching? Obviously, some interoperability, at least from Polkadot to outside of DOT, has been requiring trust in certain bridge mechanisms, which have been points of failure in the past. What's Moonbeam's approach here going forward? I mean, I know there's been this one incident with the Nomad bridge, but I mean, in the whole space, there's been countless issues. Wormhole had issues before. What can you say on that?
Yeah, I obviously have a lot of thoughts and even feelings and emotions about this since it's been close to home. Look, obviously there's a tech part to bridging, and there's certain security assumptions that get made, and that's a part of the equation, right? Is what is the technology that's at work? But I would tell you that I think what I've learned over time is that there's a tech part, but there's also this human operational part, right? Who are the teams that are running the thing? Who are monitoring it? Who are responding when there's an anomaly, and looking at it? And I think people vastly underestimate that second part. They kind of over focus on what's the technology, and they under focus on kind of the DevOps, the security, all the people that are running the thing. So I think at this point, if I see a team that's very small that's trying to run one of these bridges, makes me quite nervous, right? Because I think that, you need a 24/7 like operational team to like monitor the thing and like deal with anomalies. And so that's where I just think it is like kind of difficult these days to compete against these like big like providers. So I rattled off something that's like Wormhole, Axelar, Layer Zero. I mean, they're all making different trade-offs and their systems are quite different, but they're all like very well capitalized projects that have like large teams that have made like large investment, like have like many audits. And so I think that from my perspective, those are the ones that, if you're like looking to like get like devs and like use things, like those are the ones that make the most sense. Now, you mentioned, I mean, obviously the problem is, and the problem we've seen on Moonbeam, we have these. Here's the problem we've seen, is that you need, like, as a dev now, I would say the default position for a dev now is to be multi-chain. Like if you have a new project, it's very difficult, like, and a very hard argument to make to say like, oh, I'm just going to deploy on Arbitrum and that's it. I'm just going to deploy on Polkadot and that's it. I mean, you need to have some story that because like, the Web3 landscape is very fragmented now, like, and it's kind of all these like pockets. And so to have like a big TAM when you're talking to investors, you have to, it's like very limiting to say, oh, I'm only going to like work in this environment. So you need to have a story that's like, okay, no, like all these users and assets of Web3 are addressable market. That requires cross-chain connectivity. I think the default choice a lot of devs have right now is to say, okay, I think a lot of them arrive at this, I throw maybe CCIP, Hyperlane. So like there's like 5 providers to look at. And they'll say, okay, like, let me look at each of these. Let me pick one. I pick like Wormhole, say, like, or Axelar, and I'll go with that as my, as the kind of connectivity strategy for like building either a cross-chain application or being able to like, reach users and assets that are on other chains. Mm-hmm. The problem is that, back to the single point of failure. So like, then you're kind of, all your eggs are in that basket, right? So then you're kind of, it's like, we're going to like ride or die with like Axelar or with Wormhole. And if they ever have like downtime, if they ever have a problem, then like I'm completely like, I'm dead in the water, basically. I'm completely like dead. And so that's a problem, I'd say. That's a problem. And so this is actually something that we saw a lot on Moonbeam as people were, we were actually promoting this idea of like build on Moonbeam, but like actually like extend out and, reach users like they're on other ecosystems. And so we actually have been incubating like a project at Moonsong Labs. It's like addressing this problem like in the way like I think it should be addressed. And it draws on like kind of analogies from like my past life, like working in like kind of IT, regular Web2 IT, like in the networking domain. And so this new project is called Glacis. The idea is that it's a cross-chain, we're calling it a cross-chain router and firewall. And so what does that mean? And so the analogy is something like a network router. So the way it works is like from Glacis, like it integrates with Axelar, Layer Zero, Wormhole, like Hyperlane, CCIP, all 5 actually. And what you can do as a developer then is you configure this to say things like, okay, let's have certain destinations get routed like out Axelar, certain out Wormhole. And then like if there's ever a problem, I can like reroute things. Like so, Axelar has an upcoming maintenance window. Let's reroute like that traffic to like Wormhole. So you kind of get this control then, like you're integrating with one thing, but you're able to like route like and kind of manage like where things are, what is being used. And then one of the features we developed like based on feedback was this quorum idea where to say, hey, this is a super important, let's say token transfer or action. I want it to be redundant. So what you can do there is, let's say send it out all 3, send it out like Axelar, Layer Zero, and Wormhole, all 3. And then there's a 2 of 3 quorum. Like, so let's say on the remote side, 2 of those messages have to arrive in order for it to get forwarded on. And so what that does is, you can have a complete failure of any one of those 3 and the system will still continue to function, right? Because 2 of them like are still functioning. So then you kind of carry on business as usual. These are the kind of techniques that I saw like for early on in my career being used by people running data centers to like have like highly available networks, right? To like run high availability websites, other things, is they would have like this diversity of like network providers and then have failover and have like routing and different kinds of mechanisms to help. And so this is like, actually, this is something that is like brand new, like this project is kind of just launching now as like a separate project from Moonsong Labs. There's been some engineers from the Moonsong side working on it for quite a number of months now. But that's the kind of strategy I think makes sense. And so that'll be showcased on Moonbeam to start, like this ability to kind of have this more managed or redundant configuration for bridging and general message passing providers.
Interesting. And how would that then work if you do if you bridge it, so to say, twice? Like, is it minted twice, but then one is burned, or like how is trust sort of minimized around that in terms of choosing routes?
There's two scenarios. Well, so I think that the configuration of the system is on the dev. So you're kind of empowering the devs to say, what is the redundancy you want? Do you want some class of actions to be non-redundant and just the cheapest? Do you want some high value things to be like, have this like three-way redundancy I was talking about? So it's very configurable. That's like been the goal of the project, is to kind of make it so that the devs that are part of the project can really configure and kind of manage the way that like cross-chain interactions are flowing. So that's that's definitely like one thing. But you mentioned, I think there's different use cases. So there's a pure messaging use case, and then there's like a token like use case. And so for tokens these days, I'm not sure. Maybe it's worth explaining a little bit, right? So I feel like there's been an evolution now, right? So the first wave of cross-chain tokens tended to be these like wrapped tokens. So the idea there is that, okay, I want to move ETH from Ethereum to Moonbeam. I'll use Wormhole for that. This is how it works today, actually, like on Moonbeam, right? So like you deposit ETH on the Ethereum mainnet side, you get this like wrapped representation, Wormhole ETH on the Moonbeam side. But there's kind of the original ETH is like locked like on Ethereum, and then you have this. Sometimes people call it like a voucher, right? It's like a redeemable ticket, where it's valued like at like ETH's value on Moonbeam, but it's not the real ETH, if you want to call it that. And you can like go back across the bridge to unlock the original, and then get back like your redeem your ticket. I think what's happened in the industry is like that seemed to have like some security challenges with it, right? Because there's this honeypot on Ethereum. If that gets hacked, now if there's all these holders with the voucher that like can't redeem, basically, right? Like the voucher is valueless. So what one approach to solving this problem that we've seen is something called these like cross-chain fungible tokens, right? So there's all the major GMPs have a version of this, right? So you have Layer 0 has something called OFTs, omni-chain fungible tokens. Axelar has something called interchain tokens. Wormhole has something called X tokens. And the idea there is they're burn and mint tokens. So like, basically you create a token on Ethereum, say, like using this like standard. And then if you move it to Moonbeam, it like decrements like the balance like by one on like Ethereum, and it like increments like on Moonbeam, basically. And you're using, let's say in this case, it could be Wormhole. Again, you're using Wormhole to basically facilitate that. And that's good in the sense that you no longer have this honeypot. So it's not a voucher anymore. It's like, no, you have like the real thing like on Moonbeam. And then if you move back, it's the same thing. It gets burned on Moonbeam and it gets like minted like on Ethereum. And so I think that's like a wave that happened kind of last year, where a lot of people realized, hey, like I want to be natively cross-chain, as we said, I have to as a dev. I can make my token this like native cross-chain token, and now I can move around anywhere, and I don't have these. I mean, I have bridging risk, but not like long-lived bridging risk in the sense that like there's risk when I'm moving things, but not this honeypot that can be attacked. Yeah. I think the problem with that approach is that you're still like you put all your chips with like one provider, right? So like if you make a Layer 0 OFT, you're tied into like Layer 0, like that's it. Like you're if Layer 0 has a problem, like you have a problem. If you're basically tied into like Layer 0 forever, basically. And so this is like this Glacis project I was talking about has a token component to it too. The idea is to like retain all the benefits that I just described, but to like abstract it like from like the underlying transport layer. So you have like a Glacis token, and then you do this burn and mint, but you could say maybe each interaction is this like 2 of 3 quorum system with redundancy underneath, or you can move the lever, you can switch like which provider is being used. So now you've kind of like retained the benefit of being able to be natively cross-chain, but like you've removed this like hard dependency on like being tied in forever to like one of the bridging providers. You can like switch around. There's actually a standard called XERC20 that's made by the Connects people that is also kind of in this direction. So actually this new token standard that's being created as part of Glacis is intentionally being made compatible with that. That's something that we've seen getting some traction too, that has some similar goals as well.
Okay, I see. You mentioned that human error, I think that's how I understood it, correct me if I'm wrong. Human error around even like trust minimized bridges is underestimated. Can you speak to that? Like, for example, that project, is that incorporating BEEFY? I just know that this has been sort of a narrative from Polkadot, which I believe a lot of like non-technical users are perhaps excited about launching. And there's this project by Polkadot Labs, Hyperbridge, which is apparently leveraging this to create bridges which are supposed to be more secure and trustless. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, these are all, I mean, technical advancements to remove like trust assumptions is obviously just progress. So that's progress. I think my point from before is that I would caution that that's not the only criteria, right? That's, that alone doesn't give you a secure bridge. In my experience, it's like there's people tend to undervalue this operational aspect, because I think for most bridges, let's put it this way, right? Like, I think that a key part of operating a secure bridge is also to have this like ongoing operational kind of like vigilance and like anomaly detection. And so many bridges, like the way that they mitigate, like, because, even when you have a trustless system, there could be a bug in the system, there could be some other problem. And so what tends to happen is, as a bridge, you might have some limits and say something like, okay, like there's certain like value transfer amounts on each like cross-chain like leg. Like maybe per day, we set some limit to like some amount. And then if it exceeds that, maybe we report to the user, hey, try again tomorrow or do something. But then there's a kind of if the shit really hits the fan, there's some like submarine compartment limit to like how much like value gets like lost, right?
Yeah.
I've seen situations where it could be transfers of above a certain amount period, like may require like someone to like review it manually, right? So that's pretty annoying and slow and whatever, but that's a safety mechanism. So if like someone's doing a really anomalously large like value transfer, let's say like $5 million of like value transfer, it's just kind of like a bank. Maybe that needs to go then to someone to like review this. Does this look legit? Does it like, let's just take a look here. Does this like, was this like a hack? Was this not? Like, does it look okay? It looks okay. All right, let's approve it. Now, people don't love that. Yeah, that's like a trusted setup where there's like people approving, but I just think that's the practical reality right now. Even if you have like a very good technical implementation, that having some of these like operational like controls and like guardrails around things, like that improves safety like quite a lot. I just see that as like to run something critical like that, like, 24/7, these things, like I always am looking for like, what kind of operational team do you have? Like what kind of controls do you have in place? Like how do you monitor the systems? Like how do you, there's all these questions like that you want to, have good answers to, not just, hey, we made the best software. We made this best software with like the least amount of trust assumptions. It's going to be fine. It's like, I'm not an OG, but I've been around long enough to see like many, many problems basically. So like, there's no such thing as software that like doesn't have bugs in it or doesn't have any problems with it.
Yeah. That's good to know. Yeah. I didn't look at it that way. You mentioned Moonsong Labs. What is Moonsong Labs? What are you guys doing? And what's next? Anything you can share?
Yeah, and I already touched on some things, but so Moonsong Labs is basically like the protocol engineering team from Moonbeam came to Moonsong Labs, and we continue to work on the Moonbeam protocol work, right? So like a lot of the like you mentioned this asynchronous like backing upgrade. So the technical kind of work related to the Moonbeam protocol, a lot of that is happening like from Moonsong Labs. We are also supporting some other projects from there. It tends to be this kind of low-level Rust, like blockchain protocol engineering work. That's the specialization. So I mentioned work with some of the ZK like L2 ecosystems. That's Starkware and like Matter Labs, the ZK Sync folks are folks that we've been doing some engineering work with, in particular to learn ZK. So that's something actually that is not that heavily used in Polkadot. That's like one of the things that's kind of a learning from outside that we want to bring in is knowledge of ZK. So we're doing this kind of engineering work from Moonsong Labs. But the other thing we do have is a venture studio. So the venture studio is basically a line of business that seeks to incubate new project ideas and ultimately turn them into full-fledged projects. And so one of them that kind of, if you want to call it almost the first one, was these former Moonbeam team members are left to make the Tansy project. And so that's like, a project I believe in. I think is going to be hugely helpful to Polkadot, even to Moonbeam, and, quite unique. It kind of is uniquely enabled by the Polkadot architecture to be able to create this very great app chain like dev experience. And so that's one project. The Glacis project I mentioned, that's this cross-chain router firewall. That's another project coming out of this venture studio. And we're looking these days, like right now, also at kind of the space that's at the intersection of blockchain, Web3, and AI is an active area of, let's call it like research and prototyping like right now. So we're a lot of interesting things on the go at Moonsong Labs.
Yeah, a lot comes together there apparently. Is the ZK are the ZK efforts connected to Moonbeam then, or is this separate? Or?
It's separate right now in the sense that it's like a separate just engineering work. So like we're working on like the some contributions to like the core protocols there, like Starkware and like ZK Sync Matter Labs, like into like the node like software basically. But I think the philosophy is, we have this philosophy of learn by doing, right? So it's one thing you could say, let's learn ZK, let's go read a book, let's go, but like, in my experience, it's much better to like actually like work on a project. Like, that's like kind of the learn by doing is the best way to like learn. And so that's, that's something we've been doing, and we'll see. Yeah, obviously we're looking for opportunities to be able to, bring back ideas and cross-pollinate ideas. I would say for the two ideas that we talked about or touched on here, Glacis as this cross-chain router firewall, Tansy as this like, they call it container chains, this like way to quickly spin up app chains. I see like the products we work on is very connected, right? So my overall vision is, my vision is to create something that's like AWS, right? So Web2 AWS developer experience, right? You log in AWS, you have all these different services. So you have compute, storage, you have like identity services, like you have different kinds of databases. And then the developer can kind of pick and choose the different components they want. They all work together and then create this like very scalable application with, this abstraction and great like user experience. I'm after something like that, but all those components would be like specialized blockchains or different kinds of protocols, right? So there'd be like a Web3 version of that. There's a set of services that are designed to work together, and the developer can again pick and choose these different optimized services, combine them together to create their application. And so we have that product. We actually have like the other product I should mention is Storage Hub. So Storage Hub is an initiative that we've been working on for some time now to create a decentralized like storage chain as like a public good chain this time, like on Polkadot. Okay. And so, to give you an example there of how these things can come together, right? So imagine an application. So instead of saying like what chain it's on, it's like, so imagine an application that has some smart contracts on Moonbeam. Let's say that there's storage that's like associated with those contracts. So those could be stored on this storage chain, but connected back via XCM to like the contracts on Moonbeam, right? Simple example is an NFT. You could have an NFT where the metadata is like stored on the decentralized storage chain, but it's like connected back to the contract via XCM. So you could like update ownership and access and these kinds of things. And so then now you have this almost like a true NFT, right? That's like has like a contract like ownership part and has like the data part on a data chain. Yeah. Let's say that to connect those NFTs out to users out there, you would use something like Glacis. So that's almost like the WAN side. It's like, let's use Glacis to connect this NFT like out like and to like other like users, other chains like out in the world. Yeah. And then let's say there's some specialized functions, like Moonbeam is this like shared EVM environment. So there might be, as part of my application, there might be some part that's like very kind of compute intensive, right? Something that requires like a lot of block space. Moonbeam's, if you need a lot of block space, Moonbeam's probably not the best environment. Moonbeam's good at like coordinating things, right? This is EVM where you can like compose and coordinate like lots of different things. But if you need a lot of block space, well, then maybe a Tansy container chain would make sense. So like have that part of your application on a Tansy container chain, and again, XCM connected back to like your contracts on Moonbeam. So now that's what I think like applications are going to start to look like. It's like smart contract on Moonbeam. It's like, this like cross-chain connections like out to like all of these other places with contracts on remote chains. There's like a storage, like, decentralized storage is storing some of like the data assets, but it's connected back to these contracts. There's maybe a dedicated chain that's like providing some of the back-end horsepower that's also connected to the contract. So you're kind of living on many different like kind of chains and services, but it's all acting as one system. That's this kind of vision that like we have.
And all sort of secured by Polkadot, so to say then. Yeah. And is it all abstracted away then?
Because I think, again, you need to like connect out to other chains. So there could be components that are on other chains. But yes, then you have different trust assumptions and other things going on. But, a lot of the market and where the people that would like consume the service are likely going to be on other chains. So like you definitely need this component to connect outwards, right? Like using using Glacis is what we believe in to do that.
Right, interesting. It's really interesting to hear how you're thinking kind of holistically about the whole thing, and how the efforts sort of tie in with each other.
That's
You
the idea
mentioned
for Moonsong is we want to facilitate the creation of these things, but they're all going to be part of some larger picture. I think that is the idea.
Yeah. No, that's great. And you mentioned AI. That's been also sort of like one narrative with the advent of like OpenAI and all. It kind of swapped over into crypto. I believe there's AI projects. I don't know how much substance is behind all of those, as narrative-driven things sometimes tend to be. I just wonder how you think about this. Are there certain use cases you are envisioning already when you're working in this area?
Yeah, I've been doing a deep dive and learning a lot about like AI, different kinds of like LLM and other models. I've been doing kind of a deep dive here. I got this like gaming like computer that's over here, like that I've been running some of these open source models like myself here to learn how to use them. So I think for me, like some of the questions we've been asking are, I think that this is like, we're at the beginning of a technology that's going to be incorporated into everything, right? So it's almost similar to my belief in Web3 being, kind of pervasive and everywhere. Like AI is going to be everywhere. And so it's a huge, huge market. There's like, the one thing I will say is there's a huge amount of developer demand right now, even from like Web3 devs. Everyone is trying to figure out how to include like AI features into their applications, even Web2 applications. Where is the intersection that makes sense between Web3 and AI? This is, something I've been thinking about a bunch, right? Where I think that AI tends towards like centralization. So there is this decentralization angle because like right now, AI is dominated by these large players. You have like Meta, Google, OpenAI. And part of the reason for that like domination is that you need access to these GPUs especially to train like new models, right? So some large part of the supply, if not almost all of the supply of the high-end GPUs, like these NVIDIA H100s, are hoovered up by like the big players. And it's very hard if you're a small player to even get access to these things to be able to do things like train new models. And so that's one area that we've been looking at right now is, how can a blockchain like help with that end of the market? So one of the concepts that like I'm interested in is, blockchains are good at aggregating, all supply basically. Yeah. And so, one concept would be to get like a lot of like home grade like GPUs, like aggregate them together like on the supply side, but figure out how to run like these like larger, like more complex AI jobs like on kind of a fleet of smaller GPUs. And so I think that's interesting where, blockchains are really good at coordinating. Let's say you have thousands of people that might have like, home GPUs that could contribute into a network, but then you could aggregate those and then like be able to run like large AI jobs against it. That's something where right now, like you just can't even as a dev get access to the higher end hardware. It's just all spoken for years out at this point by like the large players. And so that could be a way for, I guess like for, to give access to devs where they just don't have access right now at all.
So you could tap into like a talent pool of devs that without a decentralized solution to this, they could not leverage AI, so to say.
I think so, because I mean, there are smaller things, but these models are getting ever larger, basically, right? So like so I think that there's this arms race going on right now, and I could see a blockchain like helping kind of uncentralize this in a way, right? Because right now there's like this heavy favoritism to the people who can get the hardware, and that's like the big players right now. So then they're the ones who are dominating. But the open source like side of AI is growing at a very fast rate. So I think that this is something where I see a lot of innovation happening. If you go to a site like Hugging Face, there's like hundreds of thousands of open source models that are being iterated on like every day. So I see a pretty natural synergy like between Web3 and AI. And in the short term, it's probably just around figuring out ways to create products that will satisfy just regular devs. In the long run, I do think there are, interesting use cases where you could have like AI models that are specific to making decisions about like Web3 actions, right? You could have like a smart contract that's calling like a model to make a decision on something.
Yeah.
That's probably still a little bit futuristic, but I think that could definitely be something fruitful.
Right. Like, I also heard a take on this in terms of crypto would be the financial rails that AI agents would be able to use. Like they wouldn't be able to use like the traditional financial solutions, financial industry. But like with crypto, it could be like a thing.
I think that's right. That's right. I mean, in some sense, like, blockchains themselves, when you have a protocol, it kind of already is this thing that gets people to do what it wants, right? It gets people to like be validators or to like be miners or to do different things, right? So it sounds scary, but I think in some sense we kind of like we already like work for these things, like I do, right? It's like I work for Moonbeam. Moonbeam is much larger. It's like it's a new thing, right? It's like a thing that's going to outlive me, hopefully, right? And so I think we're already kind of there. Might have to be a little bit careful, I guess, as we empower these things though with actual decision-making capability.
Right. Yeah, super interesting.
But there's a censorship
take.
angle too, where like there are a lot of these like online. If you go to ChatGPT, there is like they call it like alignment, right? There is like this heavy censorship and obviously there's some things that are just morally like bad, so that's one thing. But there are other things which might just be politically like undesirable, and so that's where being able to run queries against models that don't have like, for example, like political points of view put into them, that is of interest.
Yeah, that's the trick with once you have the power to draw the line, then kind of who's the person drawing the line and where do they draw it, and then I see what you're saying with ChatGPT as well. We sort of talked about funding a little bit as well. I was just wondering, there was I believe an Arrington Capital Moonbeam fund. I think in the size of 100 million. I was just wondering, what happened to it? Is it still going? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, of course. And Michael and the team at Arrington XRP have been like very strong supporters like of Moonbeam. So I can't say enough good things about them. And I've also become a personal friend of Michael's, and so very, very smart guy. They've been like incredibly supportive, like and funded like teams within the Moonbeam ecosystem. They continue to be quite active. That's like an active relationship where there's Moonbeam Foundation is meeting with them on a regular basis to review different opportunities, different things. I would say right now that's incredibly valuable to have. A VC that is like kind of standing behind the ecosystem. I think back to like you asked before about challenges in Polkadot ecosystem. I think this like VCs and funding is like one of the key ones where and I'll give you some perspective. Right, I was at the PBA, right, the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. I was giving a talk there recently. That's like a strong program, right? So like twice a year, whatever it is, whenever I go to talk to those guys, there's 30, 40 teams, people that are like building new projects. So I think Polkadot always has there's this inherent interest in Substrate and like in building things. Getting like VCs though that can like help like fund these things. That's like that is like a separate challenge basically. So like for example, Moonbeam having this like relationship with the Arrington Fund has been like very, very valuable, I'd say. And so again, it's not all the tech sometimes, right? Sometimes you need like these other elements to come in as well.
Yeah, I saw there was I found something on I think May 2023 where they funded a few projects, but I didn't know if there was anything else after that. But it's still an initiative that's ongoing.
Yeah, right. Of course, yeah.
Right. You mentioned it's not all about the tech. Perhaps to kind of wrap this up, it isn't just a technical product either, right? Like crypto, I mean, it's kind of a movement capturing the imagination of people, building something revolutionary for the future, giving more power and privacy to people around the world. I remember, for example, Gavin Woods, when he coded up a blockchain in minutes on a brand new MacBook, I think he had just bought on stage. Even that was sort of like storytelling, right? What he did that on at one talk on stage, and probably many people entered the ecosystem from seeing that. or seeing those behind the code videos, if you remember those, like sort of documentary vibe things. It kind of gave things momentum, sort of like a heartbeat, a mission. Are we talking too much about runtime upgrades, XYZ, and failing to capture sort of the soul of this movement for people as well? Telling a story that people can get behind, care enough about to be emotionally or financially invested into?
I think possibly, yeah. I mean, it's always the danger is if you over tech and you don't have that story that like people can attach to. Having that story is like what makes things powerful. So I think I agree with that as being a danger. I think we hit on some of the themes that I think it's kind of getting back to the roots, right? Like, so this thing of like why decentralization matters. That's like a key thing that I think needs to be put front and center, right? Like, if I take the example of Polkadot, here's an ecosystem that hasn't compromised on any of those things. And sure, maybe some devs don't care, but I think some devs do care. That's why there's like this huge dev community like around like Polkadot. But that message maybe needs to get out more broadly to like the non-technical audience. I saw that demo. I wasn't there, but I saw that demo that you were talking about with Gab. And I think we're at a point now where, let me just take an example. Right? For taking Tansy, that same demo can be redone now, or will be, shortly when they launch, where instead of like a demo blockchain running on a MacBook, it'll be like a full production like blockchain, like, that's like, deployed on mainnet to Polkadot, right? In like one session. That's like pretty amazing, right? That's like something where, it used to be to launch a blockchain, you would spend like a couple of years like tinkering around and doing stuff. And I think that like, we're getting to the point where that can be done in 15 minutes. Like if you had use the built-in EVM Moonbeam template and like, whatever it is like. So I think a lot of it is just getting like that message like out that here's the principles that like are important to us and how the tech has been built. A lot of thoughts gone into this, including things like OpenGov and other things. And then here's like a way that you can like, you can like deploy to production, like it's like a Web2 project, right? In like a matter of minutes. I think that's a powerful message, but getting that message out and being part of the conversation, I think is a trick. And this is something I've been thinking about, right? Because right now it's like, the narratives are, it's like DA and like L2, it's like the narratives are in like different places right now. And so I think that's, we have to figure out how to attach to or kind of like bring this like message like into like that, what the narrative is right now. It's like not exactly clear to me how to do that. Yeah,
that's fair. Tansy should do the same thing on stage with the MacBook and just code up the blockchain.
I think so. Maybe there's a thing where even intentionally to make it kind of an homage to, to Gav's thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect
MacBook, unwrap it, and then like deploy to production.
Right. I think that would be cool. Yeah. Derek, thank you so much. I mean, this has been super illuminating, super interesting to hear your views on all these topics. Really appreciate you coming on the show. You're always welcome here. Just to wrap this up, is there anything else you would like to share about Moonbeam, about what you guys are doing, and to point viewers into the right direction?
No, we covered a lot of things. I guess I think like Moonsong Labs, that's a relatively like less like known entity in kind of the big scheme of things. So I would say if people are interested in learning more, they can check out like the website moonsonglabs.com or follow us on Twitter. And we have some I think quite interesting like new initiatives like coming out soon that I think will are quite innovative and. It could be something that people might want to learn more about.
Awesome. We'll be on the lookout for sure, and we'll report on it once those announcements are made. Thank you, Derek. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.